Welcome to Interview, the recruitment podcast. The experts you'll hear from are John Geltema, who will speak from the recruiter's perspective, Mark Bassett, who represents the candidate's perspective, and Debarshi Chaudhury, who will address the tech employer's perspective to the discussions. In this episode of our podcast, we look at how AI is being used and tailored for the recruitment industry. So we'll answer questions like, how can recruiters use AI to increase their reach and efficiency? And is AI a threat to the industry in the long term, or is it something we should embrace as early as possible? Debarshi, as someone who has built a number of AI-focused products, what are your initial thoughts on all this?
I think AI in recruitment has gone through or is going through an evolution, and I see it in three distinct phases. The first phase, which has been pretty much in play for the last couple of years at least, is really using some sort of algorithms to screen resumes and essentially rate resumes based on their match with a specific job description or client requirements. And this is something that I'm sure every recruiter has seen in a number of job sites, where the job sites give you a resume score or resume rating, or basically show you the results based on a match with the job requirement. So that's something that's fairly mature technology. The problem there obviously is you're trusting that the resumes are accurate and they're written by the person who they're actually representing, and that's a big gray area there, which we can take into a different podcast. But yeah, the largely the technology is there. It can do a fairly good analysis of the text in a resume versus a job requirement, and find good or poor fit. The next phase is really outreach, which is essentially, can we use AI to reach out to candidates who are available, who may be available, or who may even be passive? And that's something that, again, that's definitely not mature. That's something people are trying to work on right now. And this goes beyond just sending them emails. It is essentially taking robocalls for sales to recruiters. And we can have processes where every time, let's say you run a search, you have a robocall to everyone that comes up in the search results. And when people pick up the phone, that's when it routes through to the recruiter, and the recruiter can take over the conversation, which is pretty much how a lot of the sales robocalls work at the moment. So definitely feasible given today's technology. And we can potentially see companies starting to do this in the very near future. And just to make this even wilder, technology exists today where you can actually replicate a human being's voice. So your robocalls can actually sound like your recruiter. So the person on the other side can hear the greeting in your recruiter's voice, and when they pick up the phone, or when they start responding, the actual recruiter can come take over the call and start conversing. The third phase, which is really we're quite far away from this at this point, is evaluation, which is really, how do I find out if the candidate is good enough at what they claim to do? And that's why we go through multiple rounds of interviews at this point of time, where we're trying to assess their capabilities for a job, and also we're trying to figure out their personality fit for the company and the team and the job itself. And AI to evaluate candidates to the level that is needed by companies to actually make an offer. That's really the holy grail. That's the end goal of all AI for recruitment, in a sense, at least in my mind. And it's something that we are working on. It's something that I know a lot of other companies are working on as well. We're fairly far away from that. I mean, we're still very limited to taking essentially a objective questions. We're basically trying to have some sort of test-taking mechanism to assess them. But really, on-the-job testing is still something that is missing. On the personality side, we have fairly robust tools to do personality assessment of candidates. But I think what's missing is the other side of the equation, which is a matching service with the company that's doing the hiring. What I mean by that is I would take the analogy of a dating service where both sides have to fill in a personality questionnaire, and then the dating service does a match and says, okay, person A is probably a good match for person B. Let's get them on a date. Today, most personality profiles are one-sided in the sense that the candidate's personality profile gets generated, but nobody really knows what the personality profile, if that's the right term, of the company that's hiring is. And it's sort of the culture of the company, the culture of the team that the person is going to be joining, even the culture of the direct manager. And I think in the not so distant future, we'll be creating, or companies will be creating their own personality profiles, which we can match up with candidate profiles to find good matches for good fits. So yeah, that's in my mind, that's how AI for recruitment is evolving and will evolve over the next few years. And I'll basically open up this discussion, and maybe we can take it one phase at a time. For the resume parsing and resume matching scores, I guess, John, Mark, maybe you guys have some input. What's been your experience with this kind of service? Do you think it works? Do you think it needs additional work, or are you happy with it? Do you think when you get search results from these job sites and they say ranked by relevance, is that actually accurate?
Well, I think what we see so far is really parsing, right? A lot of companies call it parsing. So a resume, a person applies for a job, and essentially a parsing tool within a ATS, an applicant tracking system, is going to say, here's how close or how this person ranks against that particular job. But they can really only do it based on the keywords in the search criteria set up for that specific job in the ATS, and how frequent that keyword comes up, how congested it, how closely together are various keywords to each other, and how close are they, or how far are they up, the resume of that particular candidate. So what's that kind of congestion of applicable keywords? That's really the extent of what we've seen for kind of matching, or at least I've seen. I haven't seen something, AI that takes it a step further and really kind of learns as new applicants come in, and as the recruiter actually says yay or nay on the previous applicants, and kind of evolves that process. I definitely would be excited about seeing more of that as the industry progresses. But it certainly is not going to replace the live recruiter sitting down, looking at the person's resume and aligning it with what the client's needs are.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways. There's still a lot of room to grow too. Like, for instance, just the search I was doing yesterday, the returns, even the candidates' names were awkward and wrong. One was Sherwin-Williams, because that's the last client that the candidate had worked at, or a number of times I've noticed that, and we've got to go in and correct that. But in terms, two things. It's been super helpful when I'm getting started, and it's produced people that are appropriate. But I think if recruiters get too dependent on it too early, they're liable to miss a lot. Like, for instance, I've had our ATS has a feature where I can say, does this candidate meet the qualifications? And I can click on that, and it'll say, yes, yes, yes here, no, 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 no here. But all of that is dependent on how we set up the criteria. And there's a lot of people missing that would be appropriate that I want to check anyway. So it's helpful in terms of getting to the obvious and first and right people to get people in the process. But I think you really need to still be willing to tweak it and be open to misinterpretation. For instance, when you begin to say, I want 5 years of Java experience and 7 years of this, well, yeah, you can figure some of that out, but would not a candidate who in 4 years be a little bit sharper and might be able to accomplish what someone in 6 or 7 hasn't yet? So, if we're sticking to the letter of the law, we're bound to miss prospects that might be worth a call, even if they're short, maybe a year or two on certain skill sets.
Right, and that's always a challenge with any of these search algorithms. Is essentially how wide a net do you cast? I mean, if you cast too wide a net, then the search results become less meaningful because you just get too many of them. Versus if you cast too narrow a net, so to speak, then you run the risk of missing out on some great candidates who would basically just never meet those criterion. So it's a continuous balancing act there, in a sense, right?
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I'd really like to see is as we enter our search criteria and applicants come in, or like Job Diva has for the harvesting, where they'll go out and farm resumes from various sites and bring them in based on our search criteria. I'd love for an AI solution to look at who did we look at, who did we reject, who did we move in the process, and have a real breakdown of their background. How many years, like Mark said, how many years in Java, how many years in these various technologies, based on the assessment of their resume, so that if we and a historical evolution of our changing criteria. So our initial criteria may be super specific, and maybe we didn't get anybody, and then we open it up. We changed the criteria, but I don't know of anything that understands. Okay, here are the changes. Here are the candidates we got from it. Here are the ones we liked and we didn't like, and doing kind of that assessment from an AI perspective of why. They can't necessarily predict why we made these decisions, but they can say, okay, here are the decisions made, by the user for that software, and take those, and not necessarily throw away the old criteria, but really kind of hone in on, okay, what criteria worked best, so that could be, come up as a suggestion from a new similar job that comes up later, but also, what criteria led to the right candidates for the job. And so that it can, learn from it and teach us ultimately what was effective for that search. So, if it could evolve and learn that way, that would be great. Other than us trying to, okay, we'll try this, that worked, that didn't work, we'll tweak this, and then having no memory but our own to, use that criteria for evolving a search for a particular job, or using that criteria for new jobs coming in.
Right. And I get your point. I'll just add a couple of technicalities there in a sense. So absolutely, a learning algorithm there would be awesome, where the system learns from your behavior, where you're essentially rejecting or approving candidates, and it learns. It basically analyzes every resume that you're rejecting or approving, and then modifies its criterion based on that. Now, here's where it gets tricky, is essentially, does every company do it the same way? Or is there a specific secret sauce that you have that essentially makes it unique to your company, right? And if that is the case, then there's an additional complication there where, let's put it this way, a system, most AI systems are as powerful as the data you throw at them. The more data you throw at them, the more they learn, the better they learn, and the more efficient they get. However, it's very difficult to give them enough data to be very efficient using a small data set which potentially one company can have, right? And so it's almost like a catch-22 situation. Then you're forced to open it up to every company using the system. So you have, let's say, thousands of companies using the system. You collect data from all of them, and then your algorithm essentially learns from all of them. But then it forces you to go the route that is the sort of the common route, right? Then your unique criteria, what you were doing to make yourself stand out from the others, is lost. So it's a bit of a balancing act there as well, where if it's learning, you have to give it a lot of data to learn, and then it's potentially you get directed in a way that you didn't want to get directed because that's where everyone else is heading. It would definitely be helpful if the recommendation engines and the recommendation algorithms could actually be guided by the recruiters themselves and the recruiters' input into the system. Absolutely.
I definitely see this, I mean, not as a replacement for recruiters, but to help recruiters be more efficient, more effective. And, they still have to evaluate the resumes, but they're spending more time on the right candidates and less time on the wrong candidates. Should the AI solution be implemented, effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the goal of most recruitment technology at this point. And this is a personal observation, most recruiters end up spending 90% of their time on candidates who are not going to get hired. And it should really be the other way around. They should be spending 90% of their time on the best candidates, who are the people who have the greatest chance of getting hired. And all of this is just to facilitate that transition, in a sense. Coming to the next evolution, or the next phase, so to speak, the automated outreach. And this is more, I guess this is where it gets into questions of some level of business ethics, some level of morality. We all know what we feel about robocalls in general. So what do you guys think? I mean, using automation to reach out to candidates, and obviously we all use some level of automation for using emails and automated email reach outs. But what about phone calls? What about Twitter reach outs and the like? How do you feel? What's your comfort level with that?
I'm still a strong believer that a live conversation is absolutely key to most search projects. You got to build a relationship. I know it's a broken record, but you got to build the relationship. Now, that being said, let's say somebody applies for a job and then they get an automated email to set up and do an online interview. And maybe they set it up or maybe they didn't. But a live call can be made out to that person to say, hey, did you get the email? Just to kind of reinforce, we'd love to chat with you. Your background looks excellent. But this first round interview is actually done online is going to really help us, move this process along much more efficiently and effectively for you. And so, you don't have to impersonalize it and just leave it as all digital, all the way up to that, to wrapping up that first round. But to have a live body actually make the follow-through call and just let them know there's a live body. There's somebody here that's eager and interested in in taking you to the next level.
I'm really interested in the idea of using automation from a biz dev and client side perspective, which really hadn't even occurred to me until you just mentioned it. I've seen. I was really skeptical about it, but I've got a client that does the Facebook bots, and he gave me an example of how far that exchange can go in a dialogue before a real person needs to step in. I was shocked at the level of intelligence, that was obvious in the scripts. But on the other hand, I'm also the guy who's the first person to hang up on an automated call, right? I mean, just as soon as I hear it's automated, I don't even care who it's from. I hang up on it. And I know there's a lot of work being done to block that. I mean, one of our clients is now the number one robocall blocker in the U.S. and the CEO showing up on all types of media sites talking about that. So there's probably as much of an effort to undo it as there is to build it, right?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And but there's obviously, as you said, I mean, if someone knows it's a robocall, the possibility of them hanging up is very high. I would do that 100% of the time. But as you also know, that there's a lot of effort going into hide the fact that it's a robocall, right? I mean, Google's been building this technology which can essentially call restaurants and make reservations for you, right? And the person on the other side doesn't really know it's a robot at all. It's just they think they're speaking to a real person. As I mentioned earlier in my monologue at the beginning, there's technology out there that can replicate your voice. So, Mark, I can literally record you for, 10 minutes, and then I can build a robocall system, which essentially talks with your voice. What companies could essentially do is they can set up these robocalls where, let's say, I'm searching for a Java programmer in New York City. We do a search for Java programmers in New York City currently looking for a job, and then run a script which will go through their phone numbers, start calling them one after the other, right? And when they pick up the phone, it starts talking to them in your voice. And only when they express a level of interest, then it automatically routes to your desk, and you pick up the phone and you take over the conversation, right? I mean, that's we're not there yet, quite frankly, but we're not very far away either from making that a reality.
That's fascinating. That's kind of frightening, actually. It's in the wrong hands. It'd be worse than making your your round of midnight drunken phone calls to family members. Wow. I'd be willing to try it only because of how terrible marketing automation results are for email marketing. The click-through rates or the response rates are utterly ridiculous. And what some of those bots are doing, like for instance, I think on Facebook, my client had indicated that if the prospect has not responded within the last 24 hours, then they are prevented from reaching out again. Imagine that kind of restriction being applied to email marketing. So something's got to be done that could improve it, because companies obviously want to do this, and I would love to try it. But until it's actually perfected, it would be embarrassing to be caught with your pants down, so to speak. Oops, I didn't know how far this conversation got. I mean, obviously there must be some sort of a transcript that would be sent along with the call, right? So we know how much was done or how far it's gotten or what his responses were. But I didn't realize we're even that close to doing something like that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the scripts are out there. I mean, the scripts have been there for a while. So yeah, the initial phase of the conversation, hey, are you John Smith? We're hiring for a Java developer programmer in New York City. It's a Fortune 100 client. Are you interested? And the moment John Smith says, yes, I'm interested, that's when you step in, essentially. And that's when your phone rings and you pick it up and step in. So yeah, that's it's interesting, and I think it's going to be reality fairly soon. In the interest of time, I'll just move on to the third phase of it, which is automated evaluation. And this is a tricky subject because obviously, again, different kinds of jobs need different kinds of evaluation and skills evaluation. What, in your experience, and this is an open-ended question, but what has been the best way to evaluate candidates from a skills perspective? And ignore AI for now. I mean, I'm just trying to get to experientially what's been most effective in from all the work that you've done so far.
Well, on the technical side, a lot of our clients will use a coding test, whether it's on-site, online, or wherever, where the person may need to to build some small app, using some specific technology, or with some clients, technology of their choice, and essentially deliver a working application, to the client for whatever the criteria of the application, and so the client can essentially assess the person's coding abilities, style, best practices, design patterns, whatever they might use in it to to determine any gaps, things that overline with the current team's kind of coding standards and approach, et cetera. And so it gives them a better idea as to this person's coding ability beyond just having a live conversation and having that person kind of sell them on their capabilities. They can actually, see it written down, and then have a dialogue about it. Well, why'd you do this versus that? Have you thought about using this or whatever it was? And give, be able to really kind of dig into their capabilities beyond maybe a standard kind of technical test on certain technologies. This one seems to have the most effect, at least on the development side.
Right, and that's been my experience as well. I mean, we've almost never hired a developer without having them write real code. But this is something I think AI can actually be fairly effective at because it can easily design adaptive coding exercises where it changes the parameters, makes it progressively tougher, tests out different aspects of a programmer's skills based on essentially their previous results, and give a fairly thorough evaluation at the end of the session on the relative skill level. On the tech side, I think that's fairly straightforward. I'm pretty sure that within the next year or two we'll have. We already have fairly sophisticated systems, but it'll get even better. I'm actually curious about non-technical roles, and let's say sales, marketing, or accounting, finance. Accounting, finance is more objective, but let's say a sales position, right? How would you, or could you envision a situation where you're using AI to actually evaluate the skills of a salesperson?
That's a great question. I mean, because it's actually, when you say sales and marketing together, that's difficult. But sales in particular, it's show me the money. Show me, how when we ask about a skill set and how they do in their performance, have you hit your numbers? Have you hit your quota? And what's been your percentage against goal for the last X amount of years? But where sales gets super complicated is in the individual sales process. There's probably a dozen that I could just name off the top of my head that would be considered very different from each other. The global enterprise level, C-level executive presentation, which is, big numbers and long sales cycles and all about relationship, versus an SMB, small business, or a channel sale versus a partnership or versus direct, whether it's an inside or an outside sales process. I think in terms of lining up automation, you'd want to have some sort of a situation where you have a salesperson presenting what he knows or she knows against specific objections, perhaps that are set up, and almost make it like a role play, perhaps, where you can see how the candidate reacts or responds in given situations or specific objections that may come up. John's kind of famous for asking a candidate right out of the gate, tell me what you're best at and what do you like to do? What makes you better than anybody else? And whatever that answer is probably where one ought to give them the opportunity to test. Because if I claim that I'm best at, lead generation and email marketing, and then if I'm tested to be marginal at that, then I can probably safely assure that the rest of that person's skill sets aren't going to measure up either. But if I test outstandingly in that category, the chances are, even if I don't know something, then, looks like if I can learn it, then I'll be good at it.
And I'm thinking, actually, that something you brought up kind of stirred this in my mind. Video games do a pretty good job of it today. And I think a lot of the, the massively multiplayer online games, where you essentially have to go through multiple decision-making steps to achieve your goal. Something like that adapted to the sales process would actually be would be how I would go about trying to do this. So if I were building an AI tool for to test out a salesperson's effectiveness, that's probably the approach I would take. Build a video game which essentially takes them through different simulations and where they have to make specific decisions at specific points of time, and maybe interact with the characters in a certain way to progress through the game. And I think that's something we can take offline and think about building at some point.
Well, I mean, it's almost like what we used to call the acid test when we were hiring recruiters or biz dev people. We give them a pile of, I'm dating myself if it's a pile of resumes or a pile of client files. And, we already given them a script. So they're supposed to say the same thing each time, right? And the measure was, how quickly did they get through the exercise? Did they call all 20? Are they the kind of person that needed to review each profile, before they made the call, even though it was really not necessary if they're only going to say one scripted thing? We're measuring their behavior and their willingness to keep dialing through in that case, whether it was recruiters calling individual candidates or companies updating client files. But, I would imagine the people on that list got annoyed. So if there's a way to automate that and game that, wow, that would be fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, you could actually set up, and that's another approach, I think, which you just brought up. You can set up specific personas, right? Essentially, think of it as chatbots with different personality types, and have your prospective salesperson call all of the chatbots, right? With a specific trying to sell something.
Yep.
And see how the chatbots react. Right? Maybe one of them gets annoyed very easily. Maybe one of them is very patient, whatever. I mean, you can have chatbots with different personas, and that's something very, also something that's fairly near future simulation. And that could be a good test where your salesperson has to call 20 of them, one after the other, and see how they do with all 20. Right, and that's actually very interesting.
You could even apply that for customer service. You can have one chatbot be irate and ready to cancel, and another one be effusive and anxious to upgrade, and all. Or actually, why not? Even in tech support, you could probably do the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's about interaction with the human being, with the human being's personality on the other side. Until, of course, we reach a situation where it's two chatbots communicating with each other on the other side, and that's when we, I guess we enter the matrix. What do you guys think of personality matching? Basically, matching candidate personality with I guess company personality, and by that I mean something more than just the culture, because culture is a very broad term. I'm really talking about let's say the personality of the specific team that a person is going to be working in, team, their manager, their coworkers. How have you ever seen that as a problem when it's been one-sided, where the company is evaluating the candidate, but the candidate doesn't really get a chance to evaluate the company?
It's kind of the unlevel playing field that exists in the market for a job seeker who is often on his knees at the mercy of HR administrators and people screening. The companies don't seem to be as concerned about fair play in that regard, but they surely are concerned about, is it a fit? I'm working so often with startups, and that, someone's suitability to that sort of a culture is something that we're asked to measure. Often that's willingness to wear a lot of hats, willingness to work a little extra, willingness to start over again, whether that's, technically, a developer who's too in love with his architecture and that they're going to toss this and start over again tomorrow. That person is, if he's going to cry over that, that's not going to be the right environment. Or, on the sales side, it would be, how is a person accustomed to selling a product that doesn't have the brand or name recognition that he might in a larger organization? And is he able to convince a CIO to go with an unproven resource? So suitability and willingness to work in a right environment. You're right. All the tests are designed for the individual candidate in terms of personality profiling. But there really ought to be client profiling that measures the same thing for the sake of the candidate or any employer for that matter.
Well, it seems to me that it's again, going both ways. candidates go through a Myers-Briggs or whatever kind of personality test, there's no reason why the hiring manager and the team members, for that matter, can do do personality profile tests to essentially answer questions that describe the team dynamics or the team culture, and then essentially use that information as the core, the standards, if you will. That when an applicant goes in and actually does the personality profile, that profile assessment is compared not just to industry standards, but also to the team standards, the team culture that was established by the personality profile survey that the entire team, including the manager, had done. And so essentially, once the applicant gets done with their personality profile, they can get an assessment of their effectiveness towards that same role based on industry standards, and that same role based on the corporate culture standards. And so they can see not just how they did with the personnel profile for themselves, but how it compares to what the organization sees for them as their own standards as well. And of course that reflects back to it reflects back to the manager and understanding better about not just their own perspective on their team and team culture, but how the team reflects on them as well.
Right. Cool. I think I have one last question for both of you. And you might be the wrong people to ask this because you're obviously more tech savvy than the others. But what's your general feeling about AI and recruitment? I mean, does it worry you? Does it excite you? Do you feel it's a threat, or just is it a tool that you can utilize to become better? And maybe even if you've heard about it from other recruiters that you've worked with, what do you think is the general feeling in the market about this?
I'm excited about it personally. What frustrates me about it isn't the limitations. It's more. Okay, so even the automation that we use with applicant, for instance, and the things that are involved in that, the video interviewing, the personality profiling, the IQ tests, the dev scores, what I find is that customers, prospects don't believe it's possible yet. And so if I lead off with everything that we're doing and I don't think they understand the extent of it, and that it needs to be, so I think there's an educational requirement that has to be accomplished, where we need to show them, what is possible, what is being done, and what they can expect. Because right now it almost seems as if we're 20 years ahead of the market in terms of what's possible. I'm excited about it, but I always want to keep a relationship piece in this, and so the extent to which we can still interact with our clients and our candidates, and that the automation can improve that and put me in touch with better fits, whether it's on the client or the candidate side. Where I'm frightened is if this ever becomes such commoditized that our jobs become minimum wage roles, which I don't think that's going to happen in our career times.
Yeah, that's not happening. That's definitely not going to happen. I'm excited too. It just really depends on how effective it is in helping fine tune our process, make us more efficient, get more of the right people, in place, so that we're spending more of our time with the right people and not the wrong people, for whatever search project that we're working on. So, yeah, bring it on. Technology, bring it on. But if it hinders, I'm not going to use it. If it's helpful, yeah, absolutely, I'll use it, and we'll incorporate it, and we'll figure out the best ways to make it effective for a particular client flow, workflow process, or our own workflow process, or whatever it might be. So yeah, no, I'm excited about where it's going, but realize there's a long ways to go, and there's certain things that will make it, that at least initially, less efficient, and certainly it'll be change is hard for some and not for others, and so it's a learning process, an evolving process, and we're always fine-tuning our process overall to make ourselves more efficient. So whenever that new technology comes in, it might slow us down at first, but it should make us more efficient in the long run if the technology has been built effectively enough to do what it says it's going to do.
All right, let's jump into the last segment of the show, this week's Recruitment Tool. What will we be discussing this week, Debarshi?
So yeah, on the topic of AI and chatbots, there's one that we use quite a lot, which is called Pandorabots. It's really a chatbot tool that we can configure for specific purposes. And we've used that on a number of our projects, and we find it one of the most flexible and efficient chatbots at the moment in the market. So definitely something we would recommend to anyone who's thinking of building their own AI-based chatbot.
All right, well, thanks for listening in. If you have any comments or suggestions for the topics that you want us to discuss in the future, reach out to us via email at interview@inamics.com or on Twitter. So we'll be back soon with more content and suggestions about how to make your staffing operations simpler and more efficient.